What's up, guys? Jeff with Shock Surplus here again with another install video for you. This time around we got a Lexus GX470. This thing is bone stock, and we are going to be installing the Eibach Pro Truck lift kit on it. We're going to be doing it's a 2.8 inch lift in the front with a 2.2 inch lift in the rear, and this is going to be a full kit with the rear coil spring conversion. We did do an unboxing on this kit. Check that out so that you can see everything that we have, or everything that comes in that kit. So first thing, this GX did not have a sway bar, so if, and they're not going to be putting on a sway bar. They want to have a little bit more flex out of the suspension, so they're going to opt out to keep the sway bar off. But if you do have your sway bar on your GX, it's a pretty simple thing to do to get those off. Your sway bar end link would be right here. You use a 17mm socket to take off that sway bar end link, and then on the sway bar bushings, there's 4 bolts under the frame, and you use a 14mm socket to remove those 4 bolts, and the sway bar would come right out. Once you have that sway bar off, what I like to do is I like to get any tension out of the lower control arms. Put those lower control arm bushings at ease so that it makes it a little bit easier to move the control arm up or down. To do so, you're going to use a 19mm socket. You want to mark your alignment cams just to kind of bring back your cams back to stock in case they do move. When you are loosening the lower control arm bolts. Once you have those 19mm loosened, we're going to start by attacking the OEM wiring harness on the electronics. First thing you want to do is move the clips. So you have that out of the way, and then you're going to want to take a 4mm Allen to remove this sensor on the top of the struts. There are 2 of these, so once you have the one that's closest to you removed, you could go ahead and rotate this bracket to give you more access to the one that was on the opposite side. And once you have both of those off, that sensor will pop right out, and you can remove that sensor from the bracket. Once you have that sensor off of the bracket, there's a 17mm nut that's holding the bracket onto the top of the strut assembly. You're going to want to take a 17mm socket and break that nut loose. And once you have the nut off, the bracket will just slide off of that strut mount. Once I have all of that cleared off, I take off the tie rod. I remove the tie rod end link rather from the spindle, and to do that, there is a cotter pin. You want to remove that cotter pin and then break that nut off with a 19mm socket. You don't need a tie rod separator to get that break that tie rod free, but it does make it a lot easier. So I'm just gonna slide the tie rod separator on. And when you have that tie rod out of the way, you're going to want to take a 19 millimeter socket and break loose the nut holding the lower strut mount, the lower strut in. Now, once you have the lower mount unbolted, you're going to want to take your 14 millimeter wrench and take off the three nuts on these strut mounts. All right, once you have the 3 top nuts removed, you're going to want to push down on the lower control arm and push down on the lower control arm so that you can slide that lower mount out of the way. And then the whole strut assembly will kind of just want to drop out and you can get that removed. So this customer, he wants the lift height to be at that 2.8 setting on these circlips. The lower setting with the included Eibach spring is going to be a 2-inch lift. And the second notch, that's going to be your 2.8 inch. The third and fourth notches, if you're using the Eibach spring, that's only really going to be used if you have a ton of weight on the front of the vehicle, and you need that extra height. It's not typically recommended that you use these two unless you are either using your OEM springs or you have the upgraded Eibach springs and you have a ton of weight on the front. So for now, we're just going to set this at the second clip. And when putting the lower spring mount on, you want to make sure that this cutout, or the way it's machined, is in this orientation. The lower spring will line up into here, and you want to also make sure that circlip is fully seated into the lower mount. So we're going to take this to our spring compressor and get this put together. So we have the new strut assembly put together. We're going to go ahead and slide the strut assembly into the top mounts. Once you have the nuts on the top mount and threaded in the top mounts, you're just going to want to take one of the nuts and thread the nut onto the stud on the top mount to prevent that from falling down. And you can go ahead and slide the lower mount into place. If your lower mount isn't perfectly lined up into place, you could use a long screwdriver to kind of give it a little bit of a twist to get that lined up, and the lower mount should then slide in pretty easily. You don't want to take your bolt, slide that in through the back. Take your washer and your nut, Then you want to take your tie rod and the castle nut. Your 19mm socket and tighten everything down. And then you want to do the same for your castle nut. And be sure to put your cotter pin back into place. Alright, so once you have that lower mount bolted down, you're going to want to go back onto your top mount, take the strut mount hardware, or strut mount nuts, and thread those on. Take your 14mm and torque these down. Once you have those top nuts torqued down, you're going to want to take that existing wiring harness and you're going to want to zip tie this just kind of out of the way. We're not going to be removing these just in case he decides to go back to OEM shocks in the future. We're just going to tape off the ends so that there's no water that goes in and corrodes the contacts, and then we're going to zip tie these out of place. Once you've gotten everything tightened up there, you're pretty much done with the front end. We did loosen the lower control arm mounts, but with these OEM style bushings, you want to make sure that you don't torque those back down until you have the truck on its own weight, so that the bushings aren't locked in at their fully extended spot. You want the bushings to be locked in when the vehicle is at its kind of resting height, just so that you avoid putting any extra stress on the bushings. So got the front all wrapped up, and now we're going to be moving to the back. All right, now that we are in the rear, first thing we're going to want to do is take the air out of the airbags if your airbags are still in good condition and holding air. To do so, you're going to want to disconnect the air line from the compressor or from the tank. And to do so, there is a little bit of a trick. We do have the passenger side airbag removed, but you are going to want to take this clip that goes to the that's on the air hose, and you're going to want to take these prongs. So the clip is here, and you're going to want to take these prongs, and you're going to want to slide that in. You're going to twist that, slide that in into here, and then you're going to want to push in, and then you'll be able to pull the airline out. And I'll show you that down here. When you're down here, we're going to disconnect the airline from the compressor. To get space to do so, you're going to want to remove this clip. Get that out of the way. And you're going to take this clip that holds the airline, helps hold that airline in, and you're going to slide that in to push apart the clips holding the air compressor or the airbag line. This will let all the air out of the airbags, allowing you to be able to take the air spring and get that out of the way. Now, to be able to get the air spring, the airbag out of the upper mount, what you're going to want to do is look in between the body and the frame, and you'll see a metal clip that kind of looks like this. And what that clip is doing is it's holding the airbag in between. It's sliding above the frame, and it's holding the top of the airbag onto the frame like this. So you're gonna want to look for that clip and take a screwdriver, and you'll be able to kind of just pop that clip out. It's a little bit hard to see it in camera, so we use the airbag from the passenger side to show you kind of how to get that out of the way. If you can't get to it with a screwdriver, sometimes using a long skinny set of pliers will help. And you have that clip out. Now going back down under the vehicle, you want to remove the airbag, the lines that go to the airbag from the compressor. You want to make sure you remove those lines from the clip, from their clips.
And you have the airbags out.
All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and remove the old shock. First thing you're gonna want to do is pop off this clip, and let's see. Before we start removing the shock, you're gonna want to make sure the axle is being supported by the jack. And once you have that supported, the axle supported, we're going to go ahead and use the 17 millimeter to remove the top nut on the old shocks. And to help the axle drop out a little bit further, and to give yourself a little bit more room when putting in the coil spring conversion mounts, we're going to go ahead and remove the sway bar from the sway bar end link. And to get the lower shock mount out, you're gonna want to take your 17 millimeter socket and remove it from the axle down here. Take your 17 millimeter socket, and you're going to want to make sure that that axle again is supported by your jack, and you'll then be able to slide your lower mount of the shock off. Once you've got this side done, you're going to want to move over to the other side, get that sway bar end link disconnected so that you could then drop the axle down. So now that you got the sway bar disconnected, your shocks removed, you're able to lower the axle down a little bit more. First thing that we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and put on the coil spring conversion. For the upper conversion mount, you're going to want to take the shorter bolt that's included with the kit and the washer, and you're going to slide this through the upper mount, and this piece is going to slide in where the upper mount of that air spring was. You'll kind of see, it's a little bit hard to show on camera, but you'll see the upper mount where the air spring was. There's a hole where you're going to slide this bolt through, and you're going to take this nut, and you're going to tighten everything down that way. This is to be able to hold this at the top, you're going to want to use a 19 millimeter wrench. Be able to hold that nut in place, and then down below you'll take a 19 millimeter socket and tighten everything up there. And then on the lower mount, you're going to want to take this lower mount, put it in there, and you're going to take the longer bolt. You're going to slide that through the top of the lower mount conversion, and then underneath that part on the axle, you're going to want to take your washer and then your nut. All right, now that you got your spring adapters in place, you're gonna want to take your springs and line up. So the skinnier part of the spring is gonna go down on the axle. This wider portion is gonna go up into the frame. Make sure the upper spring is lined up with the upper mount. All right, so now that we got the springs in place, it's time to put the shocks in place. First thing we're gonna do is go ahead and zip tie the shock boot onto the shock body. Got to keep that shaft protected. And we're gonna start off by putting in the upper mount first. I do like to try to get the Eibach name facing the outside. And once you got the upper mount in place, you could go ahead and pull the axle up and get that sway bar end link back into the sway bar. And then to get the lower shock bolt into place, because we do now have the spring, it does help to use the jack to help bring up the axle. Now that we got the lower mount in place, we can go ahead and bolt this down. And you want to make sure you go ahead and tighten that sway bar end link again. All right, guys, there we have it. We're about wrapped up with the install on this. Last step that we're going to have to do is pull the fuse out from the fuse box. That'll prevent you from getting any check engine lights or error codes regarding the airbag system. Nice thing about this setup here is you're not going to have to worry about airbags being popped, being deflated, going bad when you're out on the trails. This is going to be a tried and true setup. This Eibach set does give you about 2.2 inches of lift in the rear. You are going to want to make sure that you go ahead and get an alignment done. Give it about 100 to 150 miles to let the spring settle before you get your alignment done. And you're ready to go hit the trail.